questions about that. When you feel any emotional dissonances or cognitive dissonances, then you have to speak up.
When you talk about the under-informed electorate, I think
Yeah, that's a new
many,
word.
many people would agree with that.
Right.
It seems that it would be also true that we have an under-informed political class as well, unless the political class is just talking to the electorate in terms that they think the electorate will respond to, rather than upping the conversation to the real issues. I mean,
Yeah.
you talked and gave the example of how President Reagan cast rules and regulations
Yeah.
to the side, and a lot of evidence that that didn't work out quite so well.
Right.
But more currently, just within the last 4 or 5 years, there's been any number of examples where so-called trickle-down economics has not worked terribly well
Right.
either, and yet not only do you not hear the electorate by and large talking about that failure, I don't really see that the political leadership is challenging the electorate to think about those kinds of
No.
messages themselves. Are they all in it together?
Well, I think it is a cultural thing, you know. One would have to reflect, you know, what has happened, because all the way we are now, you know, has not come out suddenly or whatever. It has developed over a long time, and we had, if you take the first Roosevelt thing, you know, the rebellion on Manhattan, the lower Manhattan marching against the upper Manhattan, the people in the tenement houses, stinking houses, you know, with disease and all, burned down all the landlords' houses up there, and then Theodore Roosevelt, you know, put it all down. But he also had suggestions, you know. The federal government has to intervene into the market, and we need universal health insurance. Behind that is already the experience of 100 years of depression every 12 years.
Mhm.
And during these depressions, people starved to death, you know, and then labor was too expensive afterwards. So in London and elsewhere, they started social legislation so that people would survive the depressions, and then they would have sufficient labor force and also sufficient military for the colonies. You know, all capitalistic countries need colonies. Central America, South America, and the Philippines are our colonies. India were a British colony, and Africa was divided up between the British and the French and the Germans and so on. And so Hitler wanted to have Russia for his colony, for his capitalistic masters, you know. So all capitalistic countries need cheaper and cheaper labor, cheaper and cheaper resources. And therefore, you know, the political people, they should enlighten people and should not tell them, we will not outsource. You know, if Obama promises that, they are not liars. See, that's what I want to say. They are not liars. They may wish to do that, and they make this promise, but it's not possible to do that. Why? Because it is not enough that Ford Motor Company makes the same profit. The profit has to be increased. Here the labor unions in Flint by the Civics tried, then won. And as they won, they produced that what is called the middle class. The middle class is not the middle class, it's the working class, well-earning working class. That's what we did here and what the labor unions did in Michigan. That is what is threatened now. But why, you see? Because the labor unions were so effective, the wages went up. And the higher the wages go, the lower is the surplus value. So therefore, at a certain point, the car industry went to Mississippi, and then they went to Central America, and then they went to India, and then they went to China, and so on. See, that if you want to have that system as it is, and both parties are capitalistic parties, both parties are liberal parties, both parties are bourgeois parties, so they have an affirmative attitude to the capitalist system. Under the precondition that we have this capitalistic system, you have to go where the cheaper labor is. That's why they have to outsource. If you don't want to do that, then you have to lower the wages here. So Kellogg, for instance, pays 75 cents in El Salvador or in South Africa. That is such a low wage level that the surplus value is enormous. With that surplus value, they can keep the salaries of the workers in Battle Creek relatively high, so that these workers have a car and they have a house, more than their grandfather had, And they can send their son to Western Michigan University in order to get into middle management and so on. And then they are satisfied. And it does not matter to them if the abyss between them and the Kellogg's and their houses and their cars and their vacations and their educational possibilities and so on is deepening, because they are relatively satisfied where they are. Right? So, but if you want to change that and you don't want to outsource anymore and get these cheaper labor in Africa or in India or whatever, then you would have to lower the income here. You would have to make it into a low labor country where the Germans and the Japanese would come over here because the labor here would be cheaper than anywhere else. But you would lower the living standard by 50 or 60 or 1%. And I think the American working class, 200 million people, will not take this.
I can understand that from a purely economic standpoint, but you look to other voices who would say, we have poll after poll that says that the country, and that's, you know, by nature includes everyone. Most people are saying this is not the same country. We're heading in the wrong direction. It sort of sounds like the people are willing to accept something a little bit less in terms of stuff if there was a better direction insofar as values or things that have lasting merit, without trying to sound, you know, religious about it. The people seem to be saying there has to be more out there than just more stuff, and that's why we're dissatisfied with the way that the country is going. But we as a country don't respond very well to
but
that.
the people who say, you know, it goes in the wrong direction, that's the Romney people. They say, what we saw in the last 4 years, that goes in the wrong direction. And what they mean is, you know, more regulation, or, you know, like that means the return to what was there before Reagan. That means to police the ruling class more. That is the wrong direction, which they mean. They don't think that Romney, I mean, as far as the advertisements are concerned, it always comes from the Romney side that we are going in the wrong direction. And he says the people say they're going the wrong direction.
I guess I was remembering some type of poll examples that seemed to suggest that upwards of 60% of the people in the country felt that the country was going in the wrong direction,
Right.
whatever that means. That percentage was so large that it struck me that it had to include more people than just the Romneyites, if you will.
Well, I think, you know, we can be sure that wrong direction means that we went in the wrong direction the last 4 years, and if we have another 4 years like that, then we go even further in the wrong direction, and that Romney will get us in the right direction. And that means the Reagan direction, that means the Bush direction. I think, the question is about the content of direction, you know,
Right.
because the bourgeoisie is always formalistic. They have principles, and then they don't particularize it. So both of them shout at each other and say, specifics, because they know when they give specifics that it's dangerous. If you remain, you know, with universals, which you don't particularize, then you are safe. As a matter of fact, Romney is so childlike sometimes, he says that even. He says, if I give specifics, they will all attack me. Recently he said, the rich are fine, he said, you know, no matter who gets into power, the rich are fine. That means we have a frozen system of two bourgeois parties which cannot move right or left. And therefore, whatever they pay both parties, and therefore whatever party comes in, the rich will be fine. And he says it in bright daylight, you know. I mean, this is amazing, the naivete of this, whatever you call the political class or whatever. Yes?
Could I inject a thought here? I think we are becoming informed, and I think the electorate is composed of more than party thinking. And I think that 60% that you suggest is out there contains maybe a reaction to, let's say, Monsanto's GMO, 94% of the market. They control the patents of the seeds. We're looking at the results of Jeffrey Smith's work coming out with Genetic Roulette, now a video, DVD that hit the market 6 weeks ago. I think the reaction is going to be powerful from the people who are becoming to get in the know, because we get sick from the policies that we go, the genetic modification. I mean, it's just, unbelievable what we are learning through functional medicine. But what do we have? The money goes into the med schools from the chemical companies, from the Pfizers, from the, sorry to name drop, but just places that make money out of sick people.
Right.
Instead of looking at cause, which now we have to do because we can't heal with drugs anymore. We've reached the limit on some of the diseases. We have to look at what we are doing to ourselves to create that situation.
Yeah.
And I think Adam Smith with his moral code, how to curb the greed. Well, if George Soros says capitalism destroys itself unless it's policed, how about moral code as a policing system?
Yeah,
Didn't
right.
we used to have a moral code?
Yeah.
Weren't we more functional as a country when that existed? And didn't that moral code?
Yeah, if the 60%, mean that, that they want to have another direction or whatever.
Well, I've
that
never
could be meant,
read a definition as to who those people are. I'm just thinking to myself that a lot of those people have to be feeling some of the same sense of angst on a variety of different topics that we might
If
feel
that would be
ourselves.
the case, then we wouldn't have to be afraid for Obama, But, if that includes those people who worry about the chemical industry and, our thing, then, but I think that these people who say this, at least, Romney and somebody says we went in the wrong direction for 4 years and now it's time, and Paul Ryan, too. And he means the new regulations, government intervention into business and so on, instead of letting business do its thing and so on. That is what the wrong direction is, and they think that we had once the right direction. Whenever that was, they may think of the 50s or so, the war, of course, destroyed the whole competition in Germany and Japan, so there was a good time after the war. There were a lot of needs which had not been fulfilled, and they had to be fulfilled, so it was a very strong economy. So it is not entirely clear what he thinks when we had the right direction and when we started to do the wrong direction. One could start with the second Roosevelt, that this started the wrong direction when we thought about solidarity, but subsidiarity, which was taken from the social encyclical letter of Quadragesimo Anno, 40 years after the first one, 1891. Reo Novar, new things. So 50 years after Marx, then the church suddenly saw that there was something wrong with capitalism, and then they wrote all these encyclical letters, about how to repair social capitalism, how to make it human. And that is called solidarism. That is what the popes have in their encyclicals since that time. And recently Paul Ryan went to Georgetown University, and they told him, that his budget plan has nothing to do with Jesus of Nazareth. It had something to do with Ayn Rand, who is that novelist from the Soviet Union who said greed is good, selfishness is good, and so on. So the Jesuits rejected that on the basis of the social encyclical letters. And the fellow here, the priest here, also made an edition. We mentioned him there. What was his name?
Ooh.
The fellow who went to Grand Rapids there.
Yeah, Father Sirico. Father Sirico?
Sirico, yeah. He made an edition of the encyclical letters, but he interpreted them completely in terms of neoconservatism and neoliberalism. So, so the Jesuits who produce those encyclicals, they really write them. It's not the popes who write them. That this fellow there, Paul Ryan, or so, and his budget, that is far out. The solidarity or the solidarity movement, or solidarism, wants to be between liberalism and socialism. So from liberalism, they still take the idea of private property. They do not deny private property. But on the other hand, they want to have labor unions, and they want to have just wages, and so on and so on. So it's between the two sides, this Catholic solidarism. So we don't know exactly where these 60% come from, but it's possible, that when they want to have a new direction, that they think the corporation and the health industry and so on, that we have enough of that and we need a new direction. But that is what Obama would say. So they could be in the Obama camp. Now, if they think, we have to go back to, we would have to go back beyond the first Roosevelt, Theodore, in order to say where it started to go wrong. What they mean was going wrong is a modification of individualism and of an atomistic liberalism. When they say, I think Romney said that we shouldn't have helped the car industry. We should have left it to the market, Well, so all these banks who are too big to fail, he would have let them fail. I mean, that is the pure liberalism of the 19th century, That is the judgment of the market. But since the first Roosevelt, one has seen that one cannot leave everything to the market. See, if you think of civil society, it has a needs system, administration of justice, and the police. It has to be policed all the time, see. So on one side we say you can fulfill all your needs, you can do whatever you want to. But that's not really true. We have more people in our prisons than any other country, see. Finally, you can fulfill your needs, but you are not allowed to frustrate other people or violate other people's right to fulfill their needs and so on. So, but there is this need, and the need system, that should be the basis, One cannot judge the civil society of how many billionaires we have. It has to be judged if the majority of all people have enough to eat, to drink, to clothe, housing, education, and health insurance. These are the fundamental needs of people. And if you have 40 million people no health insurance, even after Obama, we will still have 20 million people who are not covered by health insurance. I mean, it's, if it works, even then. And Roosevelt, 1909 started that. That's over 100 years, And still, if you think underinformed now, that's an old problem, which has grown for a long time, the Germans had this health insurance by 1870. That was 30 years before Roosevelt. And it was a conservative statesman, Roosevelt, who did it, what was his name?
Bismarck.
Bismarck, who did it in order to take the wind out of the sails of the socialists. But, and it worked beautifully.
Well, it's fascinating to hear the criticism of, all things government, and let's just talk specifically about the Medicare program, when it has its fits and starts. Let's face it, it's a huge bureaucracy, but all things considered, it seems to me, from everything that I've been exposed to, that the vast majority of people in this country are pretty pleased with the fact that there's a Medicare system.
Yeah, right.
So isn't that precisely the reason why they want to privatize it? Because it functions well, and therefore it would make a lot of profit if it's privatized.
Has the potential, but then of course if you privatize it, then all of a sudden it becomes less than something that is a guarantee by virtue of being a citizen of the country.
So we don't know exactly, right? When people say new direction or that's the wrong direction, we wouldn't know what the content is. And we talk very much formalistic all the time. And that is an old bourgeois trick to do that, to make everything formalistic, because when you bring content in, it becomes revolutionary suddenly. And therefore, in order to remain nicely conservative, you have only the forms, freedom and so on, but you don't particularize it. Justice, you don't particularize anything, and then you can fill it with whatever you want to,
Right.
So it is with this idea of freedom, it means the freedom of all, and the people use that. It's a Christian idea that all people should be free, and they use it in order to legitimate the freedom of the few all the time. That means they take that Christian thing there and make it into an ideology understood as false consciousness and as a masking of class interests and of national interests. And so it is this type of thing which it goes, and this is not this or that man now. It has happened in our culture,
Well, trying to connect what we've just talked about with bringing the message to the public sphere, is it the matter of the separation of church and state that prevents church officials, Catholic church officials, from standing up on the pulpit and saying something more about an upcoming election, like this one, for example, than simply telling the congregation to be fully informed of the issues and to understand the Catholic perspective, why don't they take the next step and actually put a name or a party or something more specific on that suggestion?
Right.
Because they would then
So-
violate the separation of church and state,
Right.
and we get into the whole business of
I
challenging
mean,
the
if they would
tax
take,
exempt
you know,
status.
if they would take the social encyclical letters, which are really from the Stoics, there, whom Paul met there, they baptized the Stoic natural law in the Catholic Church, and these encyclical letters are built on that natural law position. Now, they could preach that in the churches. When I came to Baltimore and I taught for the Jesuits, they told me I would lose all my friends if I would do this. So it is a kept secret somehow kept in the Catholic community in this country here that these social encyclical letters really exist. When the Catholics were poor, they couldn't read them. After they went up to the middle class, like the Kennedys and so on, they didn't want to read them anymore because suddenly, you know, these encyclical letters are for justice, and you know they have
Fair
made
play.
it now. They have made it now. They're the winners, and the winners don't want to hear about justice, and so therefore they didn't talk. But they could, you know, in church circles, they would be free and would not violate any church state if they would teach it there. The question is, you know, when they go out of this sphere, they cannot take one party thing because they are tax exempt. And if they would take one, although they would violate that, they could take the tax exemption away from these churches if the churches would take this sides, you know, on the pulpit. And I think also people would resent that in the church if somebody on the pulpit would suddenly have a Democratic or Republican platform there.
I went to Mass in Troy a week ago, and the priest, Troy over by Detroit, and the priest did say during his homily, you have to vote for the party that upholds marriage between man and woman. You have to vote for the party that upholds the right to life. So he was saying you have to vote Republican, but he didn't say the word Republican.
Correct.
Yeah.
And a woman stood up to start to argue with him about telling people who to vote for in church.
See? Yeah.
And then I was just like, then some people started to clap for her. And I was just stunned. I didn't know, well, the priest said that she'd have to leave. That this isn't the place for that. You have to leave. And I don't know. I just thought, well, if it's not the place for it, why did you bring it up so specifically?
Yeah, right.
You know,
So, right.
it was
So,
like you
I
said.
think-
What reaction are people
Yeah.
going to have?
I think what you
They're not
heard
gonna
is
like it.
akin to what I've heard from time to time over the years from the pulpit at the Catholic Church
Right.
here in town. But again, I'm just trying to connect it to this whole idea of bringing that system of values to the public sphere, and then obviously the church, just like other institutions, runs smack up against civil law and
Yeah. Right.
what have you in a given society, and so it's like they can make suggestions, they can make recommendations, but it's almost like they're using code language, just like
Yeah, right.
you described.
Yeah, not very much hidden after all. But I mean, they would split the community in itself, and if they would do that. But they also would risk their tax exemption if they would do that. So we should make clear, you know, what the public sphere is. In the church, that is really private space there. Public sphere would mean that somebody like Biden, you know, is a Catholic, and Paul Biden there is also a Catholic, and they have this discussion there, and we can take that as our contemporary issue now. They both confessed that they were Catholic, so they could be taken as two Catholics getting into the public sphere, and both of them said they were for the embryo. You know, the soul gets into the embryo right at the moment of conception or so. Both, and Ryan said, you know, I'm for faith, but also for intellect and science. Now, that the soul is in the embryo from the moment of conception is not a matter of science. I don't know any scientist who could prove this. So I don't know why he said that, but nevertheless, that would be a case now. So they are not in the church, you know, they're preaching or whatever. They're outside now, television, you know. This is the public sphere, and so. Biden said that he believed that, you know, that the emperor is human, a person, from the very beginning, but that he did not want to impose that on the rest of society, you know, which is a fair liberal position, you know. So I believe it myself, but so he goes in the public sphere and he says, I believe this, but it's useless for you. In a certain, it's a strange type of a position, but I mean, it fits both sides, you know. Nobody can say you don't believe it. He believes it. The church will not be satisfied with it. You know, that doesn't help him there, but otherwise it is a good. And the other one, he says, I believe it, and then he is pro-life, you know. So that is more consequential, but he may lose votes then for that, right? Because when the public has gone to, at least 2/3 have gone through the Freudian Enlightenment. So their attitude towards sexual matters, all of them, family matters, has changed. So when we had the president's, you know, Clinton's blowjob, 2/3 did not want to have him impeached, but 1/3, and the Republican Party took that up, they wanted him, you know, to be impeached. And so, therefore, if somebody says pro-life, he may risk something, but he was willing to risk that. So in a certain sense, he was more consequential, you know, in his position.
So a public forum example might be when the Cardinals, for example, challenged the Obama administration in the implementation of this Affordable Health Care
Right, yeah.
Act, specifically as it relates to...
Right. So they are the beliefs of this group, and then he goes to court. That would go into the public sphere, right? The courts belong to civil society, but that is close to the public sphere. And so, yeah, that is a good example of it, right? So, and then how does one do it otherwise? And I think that both sides have to go through that process of argumentation. The church cannot simply say dogmatically or in an authoritarian way. I mean, they can do that in the community, but when they go into the public sphere, if they are dogmatic or authoritarian, they will lose it right away. So therefore, whatever they say, it has to be part of a process of argumentation so that a modern fellow, and the majority of modern people in the public sphere, can find this plausible and acceptable, so that it could also be transformed into a bill and introduced into the legislative process and could gain majority acceptance. That is the only way how religious people, you know, can come